The food service and hospitality industries are evolving, often in ways you've never heard of, until now. Our host and technovator, Rob Grimes, is the leading voice of global food service and hospitality technology. Powered by the International Food and Beverage Technology Association, IFBTA, the Accelerate podcast is where technology and ideas are shared, served with a side of new innovation. Welcome to the Accelerate podcast.
Welcome back to another episode of the Accelerate podcast powered by the IFBTA. I'm Rob Grimes, your host, and this week I'm very excited to have one of those conversations with Richard Hatter. But before we do, and before I introduce Richard, let me just sort of recap the last session that we had together. Well, our last session was really, we called it a passion for tech, but actually it was someone who is really passionate about tech, or maybe two people having a conversation that were passionate about tech. And that was with Barbara Tim Brock, who was a year in the making to actually having on the podcast, because I met her last year at Restaurant Leadership Conference, which actually is next week. And so it's been a year. And we hadn't met before, but we knew of each other. And Barbara has a very interesting story working her way from CPG to CEO within the restaurant industry. But actually, well, she doesn't have an engineering degree, but an engineering thought process. And today she's a tech entrepreneur. But when you look at her resume, starting with CPG in the food world and manufacturing and selling to restaurant companies, getting to Aramark, to AFC, to Darden, to Pizza Hut, and then going and forming some tech consulting, doing tech consulting, being on the board of many companies, she really has that mix and that passion for tech between the food service industry and tech. And the entrepreneurial side, of course, too. But then you also, in talking to Barbara, realize that she is a leader in the Women's Food Service Forum, having been their past chair. And we rounded out the conversation on various types of technology, what she thought was hot, what people are missing, what their approach should be. But then finishing it up with advice for tech entrepreneurs, and specifically for women in food service, both in operations and on the tech side, because we know where all the great ideas come from. So if you're interested in tech entrepreneuring, if you're interested in someone who's made their way to the top from the food service lines into technology and beyond, living near Silicon Valley, then you need to listen to the episode with Barbara Tim Brock. Well, having said all that, I'm sort of thinking maybe I could say ditto at least a half of this with our conversation guest today, Richard Hatter. And let me just sort of give you the inspiration and the background by why Richard is here today. So besides the fact that he asked me if he needed to be dressed for this yesterday, and I told him, well, we're not on video. He could. He's probably dressed. I could be in my pajamas right now because he's in the UK and I'm in the US, and we're doing this at 5 a.m. for my time. So, but anyway, he didn't have to get dressed for it, but I can tell you he's got a wealth of knowledge. So, Richard, welcome to Accelerate.
Thanks very much indeed, Rob. Thank you.
So, not talking any more about your dress, but the inspiration here was Richard was introduced to me by a friend, Terrence Ronson. And actually, Richard and I crossed paths many years ago in Hong Kong. We're one of those first level LinkedIn connections where he was in the hotel industry. But he's here today very much like Barbara was here because he has a passion for technology, but he's been able to help in the development world. So, Richard, perhaps you could give us your background that took you from, well, first of all, took you to Hong Kong, but then secondly, that got you into hospitality and then that crossover into some other areas we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me on, Rob. It's a privilege to be here to share my experience. But basically, I kind of grew up overseas as an expat kid, and then did a hotel management degree in the UK. And then after about a year, I basically left the UK in 1982. It's 40 something years ago. Went off to the Virgin Islands, the BVI, where I had some interaction with Richard Branson, who was setting up Necker Island. And then I moved to Bahrain and to Thailand, to Bangkok, and I worked with the Dusit Hotel Group, where fortunately I was in a situation they were doing a big renovation. So I spent the next 4 years renovating the Dusitani Bangkok. And on the strength of that, I was approached by the Shangri-La Hotel and Resort Group, who wanted me to do a similar thing at their property in Bangkok, which was just up the road on the river next to the Oriental Hotel, the Mandarin Oriental. So I spent about 2 years there, and then moved into opening a hotel in Indonesia, which was their first property in Indonesia, and then into China, into a place called Hangzhou, which is just outside Shanghai. All these jobs then were about repositioning. I was now a GM, so the Shangri-La Group would put me into a property where um, either the joint venture was about to expire and they wanted to bring some new life into the property, or they basically wanted it repositioned. So this all culminated in me then getting posted as director of development for the Shangri-La Group in their head office, in their corporate office in Hong Kong. And I would essentially travel around for the next 4 years to the mainland China, to Malaysia, Thailand, the Philippines, essentially identifying properties that needed for their IT or systems to be upgraded, or their interior design. So I would act as the sort of liaison between the owner and the general manager and the interior designer. So I
But
really,
you weren't an IT person.
not at that
You
point.
weren't.
No,
Okay.
I would have a team of IT people with me, and they would sort of, so the chief engineer or the IT guy would go off and do their audit on what the property needed, and then we would all sort of come together and put together a bundle of needs for that particular property to bring it up to spec, to the Shangri-La spec. But at that point, I was more coming from the sort of marketing and aesthetic aspect of the property in terms of operationally what it needed, because a lot of the properties at Shang were by this time about 12 years old in those specific cities, and the new brands, American brands primarily, were moving into those cities and sort of eclipsing what Shang was doing. So they needed to bring them up to spec, and so I spent the best part of the next 4 years doing that, and then that sort of brought us up to about the big Asian Lehman Brothers, the crash in the stock market, 2009, and then I essentially then was headhunted by a company that wanted me to open a teaching research hotel, which is something I'd never thought of doing before, but it intrigued me because it gave me the opportunity to work for a university, um, reporting to academics, um, and to do something that I always loved to do, which was to bring something to life, which was,
Yes. By the way, spoiler alert here. World known hospitality university. By the way.
yeah, this particular property is the first of its kind, and to this date it still is. It's now 11 years old, but basically what happened was that the university has the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, which is on the campus very close to the Kowloon waterfront side of Tsim Sha Tsui in Hong Kong, very close to the peninsula and the Shangri-La, all those, and the Regent, which is just recently open. So it basically had a hotel school on the campus, and this particular piece of land was a dormitory which had been demolished, owned by the government, and we then lobbied with the government to introduce a teaching research hotel. They understood the need because of this huge development going on in Asia, this sort of Asian wave of new development. So you had Sentosa in Singapore, you had China, which was just and Hainan and Macau, with all the casinos going up. So there was a huge need for developing leaders of the future, not only in hotel operations, but also in the areas of revenue management and information technology. So this particular hotel school had 2,000 students, some doing postgraduate, some doing undergraduate. And so when I was taken to this particular site by the university management, it was basically a hole in the ground, and they said, "Look, we need somebody to bring this to life and to open the hotel part of it, which would have 260 rooms, 3 restaurants, a spa, and extensive conference
But
facilities."
that really is what you had been doing before that with Shangri-La, is developing, building, renovating. So what
Yeah,
makes this particular environment at a hospitality school right in the downtown of some amazing hotels,
yeah.
in that area, what makes this different as a project, and what was the opportunity?
Well, I think what appealed to me was because by this time, after 18 years with a corporation, I was a bit jaded, to be honest with you. There was a lot of politics, and with like a lot of Asian hotel companies, the owners change hands within the family. They change family members every 4 or 5 years, rather like the British government. And so, you've got to be kind of keeping up with whoever's in charge. And where this was different with the university was that it was an independent hotel operation that I was going to be setting up for them. And the fact that it was a perfect model for corporate social responsibility, I was now about 50 years old, and I felt I wanted to give something back. And the whole model of this, when the government gave the land, they said, okay, you can have the land for free to the university on the understanding that you manage this property yourselves. You have to find a GM who can bring this to life, and you manage it independently. It has to be self-sufficient. It can never be receive money from the university. It has to be successful. And the whole premise of this was that if a hotel school can run a hotel well, it must be a good hotel school. Therefore, it would attract people and set itself as a reputation for the university. And at that time, I think Hong Kong back in 2010, 11 was sort of positioning itself as the Silicon Valley, if you like, of China, because it had the legal infrastructure there and a lot of investment. So they saw this as a great way of positioning the university as a center of innovation. And so the challenge for me was, how do you take a teaching hotel to market and charge $300 a night for it and make it the best in Hong Kong when you're, like you said earlier, Rob, when you're,
Sitting in the middle of it all.
yeah, you're competing with the best brands of the world. And then you've got brands that were literally born in Hong Kong, like Mandarin Oriental with
Absolutely.
pizza and Peninsula. These are Hong Kong exports, if you
And
like,
by the way, many of them spending a fortune on technology, or being viewed as the leader in technology within the hotel rooms.
especially Peninsula. They would have every kind of gimmick and technology element within the room to try to make the guest experience more seamless. So they would, like we did in Icon, experiment with new technology on their customers. So
But did
within,
you have to pay? Do you have to pay for that technology? Because, I mean, there is a cost to the technology, and you've just said that you have to be a profitable.
yeah,
You can't be on the dole as an
well,
educational hotel.
yeah, that's a good point. What we did was, once we had actually set up the hotel and hired all the team and trained them in our own way. And the whole point was that we have to have a training program that was very easy for people to understand, because 10% of the staff would be students, the rest would be full time. So I had 360 full time staff whose job was also to teach and use the hotel as a resource center. So we had to have two of everything. So if we had Fidelio as a front office system, or Duetto as a revenue management
Hmm.
system, or Ideas, we had to have a backup one so that the students could be trained on that in the classroom environment. And then when they moved into the operations side, it was seamless. So what I did was I invited a lot of these tech companies, and that's how I kind of got into this, was to invite people um, from companies like Duetto, Steve Bosworth, and guys like that, and to come and sort of say, look, if you would like to introduce your product into Hong Kong, here's a hotel where you can prototype. We use the hotel like a laboratory, as a research center, and we will plug it in and we will share all our information with the industry. So unlike some hotel schools where they collaborate with a brand, that is guarded in secrecy. So if it's a school in Houston and it's the University of Houston and they're working with Hilton, they're teaching the Hilton way. So we were teaching our own icon, hotel icon way. And so therefore everything we did, we would share. So we would organize 5 or 6 forums a year, invite people from all over the world to do a revenue management forum, CRS forum, a concierge forum, where what we would be doing is showcasing all the latest technology that was enabling would enable independent hotels specifically to make themselves more efficient by harnessing the latest trends in technology. And what we were doing, we were being the guinea pig. We were voluntarily testing these products out. We even had 3 prototype rooms on the 10th floor of the hotel that we use exclusively to test out new systems, new products, new 3D carpets, new TV units, whatever technology was available. And in fact, that's where Terence Ronson helped. Was he chaired that committee, and all these different products came in. And then we used customers to evaluate them and give and say, well, this is something I find of value, or this is complete waste of time. I didn't use it, and they were brutally honest. So we used the hotel as a laboratory in that way. And so actually, what happened was that most of these suppliers would come to us and they would say, actually, you know what? We want the next generation of hoteliers to be familiar with our technology. We want these hotels students to understand how our system works so that when they become leaders of the future, they're familiar with it and they'll, it's like a test bed. So it was very exciting from that point of view. And we kind of started to dovetail more into the sort of sustainability side of it and how we could use tech to make the hotel
Well,
more
yeah, let me suggest on that
sustainable.
that first of all, I have one question. Then I'd like to take a break and actually talk about sustainability in a larger picture on the other side of the break. But
Right.
before we take that break, um, did you find that the rooms and what you were putting forward were enthusiastically embraced by both the guests as well as the suppliers, and enthusiastically embraced, I suppose, means different things to different people, but that they gave feedback, that they participated, but at the end of the day, that there was an ROI to the guest experience as well as the supplier. And if you could just sort of give us that quick insight into that, then we'll take a break and we'll talk specifically about sustainability and other ways and examples that the technology was used.
Sure. Yeah. The I'll just give you an example. There was a company that was established in Hong Kong called Handy, Handy.
Hmm.
And this was a young entrepreneur guy who had actually been to school in America, very young guy in his early 20s. And he came up with this idea of offering a smartphone that would be positioned in the hotel room on a charger stand that would give free Wi-Fi to all customers. And then on there, the hotel could promote its services. You could use it as a concierge tool. We had a shuttle bus, so you could actually engage with the shuttle bus and see where it was, rather like a Uber car. Where's the shuttle bus stopped at the moment? How can I use it? So the whole idea of this was appealing to our international travelers, which make it up 80% of our market, because we could actually promote this as a feature of the room. So we were one of the very first hotels in Hong Kong to put in the free minibar, where we put a selection of items, and then we promoted this handy phone where you basically wouldn't need to use your own Wi-Fi or your own system when you were outside the hotel. So this worked not only when you were in the hotel, all you had to do was log in with your room number, and then wherever you were in the city, right up until the border of China, you would get free Wi-Fi. So guests could basically lock their own phone in the safe and forget about it,
Hmm.
and use this tool. So that was just an example of one of them. But there were some items, and that had a different tangible benefit, because there were people that would book that because they thought that was such a cool idea,
Of
and
course.
many people spoke about that. The number of TripAdvisor reviews we had there where this was mentioned, and the other one was that we also work with Tesla. To Tesla was just launching in 2015-16 into Hong Kong, and we wanted. I mean, it's technology in the form of a vehicle, but we wanted to prototype a limo service using electric vehicles, where the guest would actually be picked up with one of our Tesla fleet, and a charging unit would be established at the hotel. So we gave special F&B discounts to all the drivers of electric vehicles who came and charged in our hotel.
And
Which,
then you get them
yeah,
to not only charge there, but they also recommend that
money.
everything else there.
Yeah,
That was sort of before its time, if
yeah.
you want to think about that, because on an episode within the last couple of weeks, I talked about my experience underground in Las Vegas with the Teslas going from one side of the convention center to the other. But you know what? Let's just take a break for a second, because I really want to drill down into the corporate social responsibility, CSR, and hospitality, and some tech examples. So. Uh, Before we get there, if you're like me, and I remind people this all the time, and you're constantly exploring, seeking, and feeding a passion for technology and innovation, as Richard has and Barbara before her, it doesn't matter if it's for work within our industries, for your own personal use, or just something that makes you say, wow. If you see that, say something, take a picture, video, send a link, or just pass it on directly to me at coolideas@robertgrimes.com, because it's how we explore, learn, share, and start that conversation together. And speaking of Accelerate, to subscribe, or if you have any thoughts, comments, or suggestions, please send us a note to our producer at accelerate@savor.fm, SAVOR.fm. So, with that, Richard, you mentioned CSR, and our audience, corporate social responsibility. Our audience is a wide-ranging audience globally, both in the lodging industry, which certainly has embraced this, but also in the restaurant industry. So could we start out with just sort of the definition of a CSR within hospitality?
Yeah, I mean, the way I look at it is the using the kind of model of hotel icon, if you like, versus the way Shangri-La did it. And to a certain extent, CSR is about giving back something to the community, and making products and the experience for the customer, something that they feel good about, that they relate to. In the terms of, like, with Hotel Icon, it was the fact that you're selling a hotel on the basis that it's a teaching hotel, and therefore the fact that many guests used us because they were giving something back to industry. They knew that, and we made it very transparent that we were a teaching hotel, and we said, if you stay at this hotel, all profits will go back to education. They will go back to the university. The university is, you know, a model of CSR, and it wasn't about specific individual amenities or experiences. It was just the overall ethos that you were doing something and we were being brilliant together. So education and hospitality coming together and creating uh, an amazing experience, where then you could have a feel good factor that, oh, I've contributed to something really worthwhile. And like I said, again, many customers talked about this on their review, whether Google review or TripAdvisor, and they said that this was such a brilliant idea. And CSR, often is sort of a bit like greenwashing. A lot of people talk about it because it's something to have in the corporate report, but in this particular property, it was something that was living and breathing, and something we drilled down into the
Well,
staff.
people could touch and see it, but
Yeah,
I guess, does it work? Is it a twofold question? Does it work because A, you're in an educational institution, which I would suspect globally, is focused on CSR, but also in Hong Kong. Is there a specific focus and therefore the ability to marry technology, hospitality, which are both key things in Hong Kong, and also show living examples through a teaching school in the center of everything? Is that what pulls it all together?
I think in this particular instance it did. And I think there were times when we tried to do this with Shangri-La. And I remember I went to Miami for a conference. And when I stayed there, I stayed at the One Hotels in
Hmm.
Miami. And I also stayed at the one in Brooklyn. And I was really impressed with the way they had these water filters with the really amazing filtration system, and they had like a faucet in the room. So when I came back and I sat down with my chief engineer, I said, "Look, let's get rid of all the plastic bottles. Let's do what these guys are doing." We were the first hotel to introduce it, and we had a lot of other hoteliers, and we put it into one of our prototype rooms. We actually ran it off of one of the feeds in the bathroom area, and many of the other hoteliers came, including people from Mandarin Oriental, from Shangri-La. They were really intrigued at how inexpensive it was to put this in. But the problem was they weren't allowed to do it because it meant that the brand would have to roll it out throughout all the properties. So there were a lot of very willing GMs who wanted to do stuff in CSR, but because they were part of a corporate brand, there was some sort of limitations because if you did it in one hotel, you might have to do it in the other. So in the context of being involved in a teaching hotel, yeah, we could experiment, but there were other areas like, there was a big debate about whether we should have these disposable, amenity bottles and shampoos, and that we were one of the first people to mount it on a wall in
Well,
a
you know what? Let me just interrupt you for 1 second here, because you've just brought up two issues. I don't, or two thoughts, and I don't want to lose them, but I would like you to continue on this of the examples. But when we talk about the CSR and hospitality, we obviously have the environmental aspects, ethical issues, social aspects, economic, but you also have the communities, which is part of it, which is the employees, the partners, and the guests. And you're really crossing paths into a number of these different areas to show why. But I think the point you just made was that individual corporations, while they're all focused on this specific area for many different reasons, for many different reasons and focus, don't always have the funding to be able to implement. And if they do, there's a brand standard that they expect. And it wouldn't matter, by the way, whether it's a restaurant or a hotel or even a retail store. So in this case, this teaching environment is one that everybody is invested in. The guest, you needed to have this hotel because the guests had to be engaged and give their feedback. You needed the suppliers who don't have unlimited funding, plus they also need a place to test, to have a real environment that was safe and people understood it was education testing. And you needed the operators to be able to participate. So it's sort of the best of three different worlds, bringing them together. And I don't want to miss uh, that thought here. So could you now just give us some specific examples? And you were headed down the path about the bottles in the showers, which now everybody has. So they were
yeah,
leader in this.
yeah.
Some specific examples of how you were able to test, and also how technology was able to play a role.
Well, one of the big areas in Hong Kong that was a particular problem was waste. Because it's a very small island, you've got limited space for landfills and things. And we had a very big buffet, which was incredibly popular there. It was a huge revenue earner. And the way that you had to dispose of some of the leftover food was that I one day I worked with a guy who was a Cathay Pacific captain, who had developed this product called an orca, which was like a food digesting device that would break things down into essentially sludge and water.
Sounded to me like a whale.
Yeah, basically it would consume. You'd chuck all your food waste, not recyclable stuff, but food waste, and it would break it down organically. And in this hotel, we also had a huge vertical garden, a massive green wall, which was the biggest in Asia. It was absolutely massive, and this digested food waste, that water that would be generated from that would be used to irrigate this water. So this wall. So there were things like that, but also in areas like with uniforms. We worked with a company in Hong Kong where we used bamboo and we used recycled plastic, and they, in fact, now are using AI technology to develop uniforms so that we didn't have to actually go and get a designer. We could just use the brand DNA to be able to create a uniform that fitted that concept, and then the fabrics and everything, the design, the comfort element of it was geared around the outlet and the functionality, and the staff had a really great feel good factor because they felt, oh, this uniform that I'm wearing is helping the environment. So that was another really great concept, and they used this as a case study, in fact, to help develop their brand, and they're doing very well at the moment. Those are just a couple of ideas, but we also put in a lot of solar panels. We had a big vegetable garden on the roof. In terms of technology, because we were an independent hotel, and from a CSR point of view, we tried to reduce the reliance on labor force. So using technology as the sort of spine of the hotel for everything from the accounting system, from the ordering system, the revenue management system, the CSR, everything was all linked. So unlike with a brand where you're just plugging into a network of systems, we had to do everything from scratch. And we would then prototype these things and invite other hotels to come and see what we were doing. So sustainability, on that side, the uniform experience was a really valuable one for us, because I know that with a lot of hotels there's a huge cost. It reduced our cost significantly in terms of how we had to hold inventory. You could just order and get your uniform within 4 weeks. So we weren't holding inventory stock, and we weren't tying up a lot of capital in stock. And it was just this very seamless um, experience where you were also reducing the design cost. So that was a very big learning curve for us, and it's something that we shared, and again something that the customers thought was really cool. The staff would go up and tell their guests, by the way, my uniform is actually made from bamboo or whatever it was, whatever it happened to be. So there's just a couple of examples, but the whole idea of having a teaching hotel was rather daunting at the beginning. That how would you get people to want to come and stay in a place like this? So the idea was to have these key messages built around it being all about innovation and creativity and doing something valuable to the community. And I think it's something that other hotels, independent hotels particularly, can learn from, and use their property to prototype new experiences with very little with very little investment, because people will actually come to you and want to try something out.
So, are there some areas that you think are there some exciting areas going forward that you believe should be tested or are being tested now that our listeners should be aware of?
Well, I think it's changing all the time, but I think AI in particular is one, and robotics. Robotics is something that we tested out to a very limited degree, was successful. But I know hotels in China that I visited are using it extensively for delivering room service, and it's not just a gimmick. It's not some robot sitting in a lobby that's greeting you just for a laugh and an Instagram post. I mean, these things are actually going to work. And one particular hotel in Singapore, the Marina Bay Sands, uh, they were experimenting about a year ago with using technology to helping people to find their car in a car park, because the car parks are so massive. With their phone and tagging the car so that you could actually be directed to where your car was. But I think more importantly, they were using robots to deliver housekeeping trolleys to particular rooms.
They were also using robots in their casino
Yeah,
to
yeah,
to do drinks. They were an early starter on that.
yeah. And Marina Bay Sands found that they did some testing around this, that, a lot of the time spent by housekeeping was going back to replenish their trolleys, having to push it to a service lift, go down, replenish it, and then push it back up again. So this was all done. They could alert the next robot, which would then bring the next fully stocked trolley up, and they would just be able to carry on without having to, leave the corridor. So and we also used them in Icon in Hong Kong with cleaning. We would use them to clean the ballroom. So you just basically put the layout of the ballroom floor, and when all the furniture's moved out, the robot would sit there and clean the floor and corridors. We experiment a lot with robots, and I think robots, to a certain extent, have been quite successfully implemented, as I say, in China. And also, a lot of hotels, I think, should be more and more in Hong Kong, particularly, and in Asia, embracing this key app technology. So with your mobile phone, just QR scanning and getting straight into your room. I mean, there's some. I think Park Hyatt have done it very successfully, and I think there's still a lot of hotels that are using very antiquated systems where they could be a lot more productive. So I think those areas in particular are ones that stand out.
So there is there's clearly this link between the different areas and the ways that people can interact. I think you're making the case. You've also made the case for why Hong Kong, as a capital of this, and Hong Kong Polytechnic, and even with your background, you've shown us, how you make that jump. Just sort of a last question for you as we wrap up on the personal note. So you spent all that time and in I think you said 40 years outside of the UK, but you're back in the UK. And so what's it like to be back, and how are you keeping busy?
Yeah, it's been a bit of it's a tough one, because I found myself a little bit out of touch with the ways back here. People often talk about, Thailand or some Asian countries being third world, but there's a lot of stuff in England that's broken and doesn't work, like the NHS and some of the transport systems. And I think that I've been away a long time. I'm still doing now some. I've found a base now. I'm living in West Sussex, just outside Gatwick, and I'm doing a bit of consulting now for hotels, primarily in Asia, and giving some assistance with rebranding and that type of thing. So I'm keeping myself occupied, but I'm not in a massive hurry to try and find something, uh, in a full time operational capacity back in the UK. I prefer to just sort of dive in and out of doing a few consulting projects, and in fact, that company I told you about, that we work with the uniforms, they approached me and said, would I be willing to help them with some hotels? And I think because it works so well for us, I felt that if there's something that I could share to help the CSR and sustainability ESG sort of model for hotels, there were some real tangible benefits with Crestwell. So I'm helping them spread the word. And if we can save money for hotels and do something for the environment, then that's all good.
Well, all right. So you're going to stay busy. You're not dropping out, in all these things. So listen, there was one thing I really wanted to talk to you about, but we've run out of time. I could quote the famous movie and say that you had me at Richard Branson, which would have been the very first thing you brought about. And I suspect, by the way, that could be a discussion in itself, because as I think about it, it really helped to not only start your career, but move your career along. And I also know that you have a son who's in the business, at least one. I don't know if there's others of children in the business, but it'll be interesting to see how he follows in your footsteps, and what direction he decides to take in this changing world. So Richard, thank you very much for joining me this morning on the Accelerate podcast, and I'm going to look forward to having another conversation with you, hopefully in person soon.
Thanks very much, Rob. I really appreciate it. And I love sharing the Icon story because I think it's something, it's a hotel with a purpose, and unlike anything else I've ever done. And it's great to be able to share this on your Accelerate platform, and it's the first time I've ever been able to really do that, and it's still very dear to my heart. So thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Well, you're passionate about it, and it's an iconic experience.
Yeah,
So thank you again. So with that, this podcast is brought to you by the International Food and Beverage Technology Association. The IFBTA is the industry's voice of technology within the food and beverage industries, but obviously crossing over in everybody who has food and beverage like hospitality, and hence why Richard has joined us today. But we provide thought leadership as a single impartial go-to resource. The IFBTA offers in-person and online communities to connect with your peers, the exchange, an all-encompassing global technology directory, and an industry-wide professional education and certification program. Bottom line, the IFBTA is your place to gather, learn, and share. So thank you for joining us on this episode of Accelerate, powered by the IFBTA. I'm Rob Grimes, your host, and I look forward to our next accelerated conversation together.